to have you all here to meet and hear and see from Tom Davenport. He's going to say a few words and then show his film Willa, An American Snow White. It may go a little longer than some of you might have been expecting, but we'll have as much discussion as you have time for. And I think you'll really enjoy seeing it. Those of you who've already seen Ashpet in my class know that Mr. Davenport's films really capture a lot of what's in the fairy tales that we're familiar with and change them in new and interesting ways. The thing that I think I like best about the ones that I've seen is the way that the impulse to tell stories is so central to them. These are stories that we love. We tell them over and over again. They're storytellers in his films, and he is, I think, primarily a storyteller who's given us these films to give us one more version. So I will not say anything more, but turn things over to you.
Thank you very much. This particular motion pictures are, in a sense, some motion pictures anyway, popular motion pictures are often based on fairy tales, whether they know it or not. I mean, there are certain kind of plots that people like, that human beings like, and they told over and over again. And so kind of like the Cinderella plot, you know. And sometimes they're couched as fairy tales, like Ever After, which is a recent one that's it's a pretty good movie. I suggest that you all see it. But others are not, like, you know, I think it's one with Clark Gable and Somebody Else Could Happen One Night. It's a very much a fairy tale of the kind of the taming of the shrew type of story. And but in other words, popular movies often use these similar plot lines that are the nature of fairy tales. Now, of course, we took the fairy tale itself and then put it back into motion picture. But it's not all fairy tales lend themselves to this kind of treatment, which is basically looks like it could happen, you know. And so some of them have very magical elements and animals that change into people and vice versa and so forth. But actually modern film technology lends itself more and more to fantasy now because of the use of digital methods of way of changing things. But I grew up in a kind of a documentary school, and I do a lot of documentaries on folklore subjects generally. I'm on my way down to Chapel Hill, where we're going to finish a film, the latest little movie I did, which is about 3 men who hunt rabbits with beagle dogs, and it's just a little film about hunting with beagle dogs. This film that you're going to see was sponsored by the National Endowment for the Humanities, which was the main sugar daddy of my life, and furnished funds for most of the films, the later films especially, but now with politics and the change of government and so forth, that funding source is no longer available, and I probably won't be able to make another fairy tale film. It's just the nature of commerce and finance. It's very difficult to raise money for films, and it's a lot of I was good at grant writing, and that's way I got my money. But the actual, if you notice now, lots of even public television even seems more commercial now than it did before. So anyway, this is a film that has an interesting story behind it. It's also an example of how people like myself, directors and producers, steal things from other ideas. I mean, Snow White, for one, this is the plot. I stole the plot, you can say. But in a sense, you don't steal the plot. There was an interesting article in the Wall Street Journal about people who are trying to sue companies for the big film companies for ideas that they think that they had, and the studio then got and made into a movie. But the fact is, usually, when you have an idea, a lot of other people have a similar idea, and it's sort of part of a collective unconscious that kind of goes through people generally. So in a way, we are all connected up, and it's not like we're that individual at all. If it was totally individualistic, I think none of you would like the movie at all. You know, it would be something I might like, but no one would, it wouldn't translate. There wouldn't be an audience for it. So a lot of it is the similarity in people. Now this particular film since the audience is mostly female here, is a film that I think, I don't know, I'm just going to see how you all react to it and see whether you think it's worthy of I didn't make it for children, and I don't make my films for children. It happens that children like the movie, and the niche of making children's films also provides the economic connection, which as a filmmaker you have to be aware of, because films cost a lot of money. They take a lot of time. Willa, with the grants and everything, took about 5 years to finish. And so it's a big commitment to make a film like this. We didn't have that much money. It was made, seemed like a lot of money to you all, but it was made on about a $400,000 grant. It's a feature film, but it looks like it's a film that would probably cost Hollywood several $1 million easily, in the sets and the various things that you'll see in the film. But there was a certain amount of luck involved and accidents that occurred during the making of this movie that caused us to change it and develop the story in different ways, and I can go into that after you see the film, if you survive. So sit tight. It's an 80-minute movie. So it's like, I guess, I haven't seen this on the screen, and I'll look at it with you and enjoy it too. Thanks a lot. You could probably fast forward it through here. I don't know how long this time is going to be. Okay, you went too far. Back her up. Very speedy machine. Go back a little. The film, everybody knows the Snow White story, I assume. So you can see how we derived the story from the Snow White story, and then we also mixed in the Romeo and Juliet thing. A lot of that came from the fact that when this actress Becky Stark, who we sort of ran into, this was a very kind of a happy circumstance because she came to a casting call, and she was a senior in high school in suburban Maryland around Washington, and she had just finished her doing the lead in Romeo and Juliet, and she did some scenes from that play, and we were so taken with her at the time. That was where she got the part, and she did a rehearsal scene where she was trying to rehearse some of the lines. So this was the seeds of we had a plot, we had a screenplay before this occurred, but we changed the screenplay radically as we went along in the film. When we saw her do this, we liked it so much we decided, well, let's work this in to the play somehow. The other thing that happened was when we filmed initially the story was that we got our initial screenplay was quite different from this. The story was derived from an Appalachian version of Snow White that I got called The Stepchild that was treated mighty bad. And in fact, when we did that film, when we first started the film and wrote the screenplay, we called it The Stepchild. And the 35mm print, the only 35mm print I have of this film, has the title The Stepchild on it, because that was what it was from. We decided to change that title ultimately because we felt that The Stepchild would be fairly off-putting to parents many of whom are divorced now and taking their kids to see movies like this. So anyway, at that time, that version was very earthy. If you've seen in my film Mutzmeg, it was a little like that kind of story. And what happened was then we wrote a screenplay based on that roughly with the same screenplay writer who wrote the story for Ashpet, Roger Manley. And Roger Manley had is a photographer, and he had been had just finished a book based on Ripley's Believe It or Not, their collections of photographs. So he was into this kind of carnival mode, and when he wrote the screenplay, which we submitted to the National Endowment of Humanities, the screenplay was extremely different. The stepmother in the story, well, first of all, it was set in a mill town in the South around this period. And the house that she was in was kind of a Victorian house that you would find in places like Winchester, Virginia, or out on the outskirts of small towns in the South. And what happens in that story is that the girl's mother dies, and the father hires this woman to take care of Snow White, or Willa in this case, and she turns out to be a refugee or an escapee from a carnival. She was a snake charmer at a carnival. And she comes down there to get this job. And she's very attractive, but kind of tacky. And she is not accepted by this society in this small town. So she is lonely. So she gets her buddy, Fast Eddie, to come down, who is the huntsman character. And he is worked within the carnival. It's kind of an unseemly kind of character. And Willa discovers the two of them making love, and they decide to get rid of her for this reason. And Eddie, in this case, the character who's ultimately Otto, the huntsman character, he goes off and tries to rape her, and she escapes, and she ends up at the house of these three strange German brothers who are hiding out from all the prejudice against Germans in World War I. Well, the problem with that film script was that, first of all, we had to establish World War I, the whole historical thing, which was difficult. And secondly, I couldn't find a house. I started looking for this house that she was going to live in. And I couldn't, most of these Victorian houses that I found were in towns, and I couldn't for the life of me figure out how anybody would suspend disbelief enough to think that all these strange things would be going on in this house. And also we couldn't figure out why the father, what happens to Snow White when the father goes away and she runs off, and it just didn't make sense, a lot of things. But anyway, that's what we were looking for. And we came across this house. Anybody from here from Leesburg, Virginia, or Northern Virginia at all? Well, this house is a place it's a museum in Leesburg called Morven Park. And we walked into this house, and my wife and I looked it over, and it was very, very grand. It was extremely strange. I don't know if you've read the story Great Expectations by Charles Dickens. There's a house in that where Mrs. Havisham lives. It's never open to the sunlight, and it's very strange. And this kind of reminded me, I saw that movie when I was a little kid, and this house reminded me of it. There was a curator there. He was a very strange man, and he kept this museum away from everybody. It was like like a dusty attic in a way. And we came in there, and we said, I knew the guy, and I said, could we use it in the film? And he said, yes. He said it's $2,500 a day for an 8-hour day, and double time for overtime. Well, when you're filming, it's absolutely, you go overtime. You work about 14, 15 hours at a time. And there's no way, with the budget that we had, that we could afford this. So it was and he was very rude to me. And there were people on the staff of the museum who were present at this thing. And it was a very embarrassing situation, as it was. And I loved the house. I thought it was great. But I later found out the guy was being fired. He was going to be replaced because the way he kept this place. So as soon as he was out of there, the new curator came in, and I said, could he use the house? Well, the new curator didn't quite know what movies were involved in movies, and he was very willing, because anything new he was going to do. And so he said, sure, come on in there. And the museum is closed in the wintertime. If you guys can get out of there by the 1st of April, we'll let you come in. Well, this was like around close to Christmas time. We had a completely different story. You couldn't imagine a mill owner living in that house in the South, and nor could you imagine this had to be much grander. So we had to come up with this new plot, and we were just writing furiously, and this was when he did this was about 6 years ago, and this was the beginning of email, and it was email that saved us, because we had different people all over the country who were interested in the thing, and we started sending these little email letters around and sending our script back and forth in email. It was a very exciting time. And we came up with the idea because one of the guys, the set designer, had met Elizabeth Taylor at one point in his life, and she said that he had a hairdresser who was, you know, a lot of these stars have hairdressers. So the character of Otto was initially a hairdresser. This is how things evolve in film. And he was an evil character. And what happened was she would go into the mirror like that, and as soon as she'd start looking at the mirror, this character would emerge in her imagination, sort of. And this character, the hairdresser, and he was a catty kind of character, and he would feed on her vanity and also make her feel uncomfortable. And he was her mirror, in a sense. Well, the idea also that at this time, you remember John Warner, who used to be was still a senator from Virginia, was married to Elizabeth Taylor at one time, and she'd come to Middleburg to kind of live the good life and thought that she was going to have a kind of stable existence there. And we thought that this is what could have been the dream of this retired actress, to come back to Virginia and be there. So that was kind of our what's called a subtext in a movie, kind of a background history that you have to have, and the actors have to have. They have to have this information in order for them to do, because you give them bits and pieces of things that they're dealing with in the present. It's like you can walk into a room, a person's room, in your friend's room or your friend's mother's and father's house, and you can see the kind of things that they have, and you already know what the elements of class and culture that are involved just by the objects in their room. And these things have to do, you just fill in a kind of history from this sort of thing. But anyway, we were working fast and furious at this time, and of course this meant that the whole second part of the plot, which was she running off with these German brothers and Fast Eddie and all this other stuff, was no longer working, because gradually we involved this character Otto to be a kindly character. He in the play, in the story, remember, if you remember the Snow White story, the huntsman is like the way I saw him in the story, the archetype was like he was powerless. He's powerless from the queen. He's like a weak husband. And so he's not her husband, but yet he's in love with her. And he has to do her bidding. It's like there's a romance. And there's a wonderful film that's related to this that I urge you to see. It's just an American classic called Sunset Boulevard. Sunset Boulevard is a Snow White story with William Holden plays a writer in Hollywood. And they have a character played by Erich von Stroheim, who was a butler in love with Gloria Swanson, and who's this strange woman, lives in a house like this, and he comes, it's like Snow White from the point of view of the prince. A queer twist on Snow White, that story is. But it just shows you how movies go and are derivative of this, and we watch that movie a lot because you draw on other movies and you draw on other ideas. Well, anyway, he became he was an actor I liked to work with a lot, and he became a kindly character in the story. Initially he was evil, because we had another character in the story who was a sort of a maid, who was like Snow White's mother, but we couldn't figure out how that would work out, so we kind of did away with her, and as soon as she was gone away with her, there had to be a nicer character, and so we created the character of Otto. But these things, oddly enough, when you're working on these plots, these kind of, how can I say, formula plots, they're like archetypes. They're almost like there's a relationship between them. It seems almost as if they're like physics formulas. There's something about them that if you do away with one character, then this has to change, and you have to bring these things in, and they have a kind of law that's very interesting. It's almost like this plot will work because of this, but if it doesn't have this in it, it won't work. Now, the thing about fairy tales generally is that there are plots that have been in existence. Probably Elizabeth has told you this. These are very, very ancient stories. They come back, they were probably, they have antecedents from ancient times, and they have, oddly enough, a cross-cultural relationship. I mean, you can probably find an American Indian Cinderella, and you can find a Chinese Cinderella, and you can find an Near Eastern Cinderella, and we found in Snow White, we found Persian versions of the story, we found American Indian versions of the story, and we found, well, naturally German and Spanish and so forth, and then there was an Appalachian version, which is which was derivative, you could say historically, from English settlers and so forth. But these things, almost as if they spontaneously happen across cultures. And the reason I think that they do this, I mean, this is mythological. It drives folklorists crazy because they're interested in the differences between the two things. But mythologists like to point out the fact that these things must be, there's a shared human experience that we all share, and that these stories are derivative, somehow tap into this as if we have some kind of mental or spiritual DNA that is in common with people. That we all like a certain kind of story. And certain kinds of stories that we like, and certain other kinds of stories we don't like very much. And the ones that we like are the ones that tend evolutionary to keep going. But those, because of that, fairy tales are used. I'll talk a little bit about fairy tales. One of the things that I'm very much know about and involved in is the practice of Zen Buddhism. And in Zen Buddhism is a peculiar kind of Buddhism that's very usually not considered to be textually oriented. You know, most of you have a Christian background, and I also have that, and belong to a church and know the vestry and all that sort of thing. But in Christianity, you have a text, you have a canon, and this is a gospel. There are these gospels that are that aren't. Nobody writes new gospels. There are certain gospels that are recognized for political or social reasons and religious reasons, and so forth. And everyone relates, especially if you, for example, are Protestant or Baptist or Methodist or that kind of Christian, rather than a Catholic. A Catholic don't read the Bibles that much. They tend to go with the priest and the Pope. I'm making very general distinctions. But you have a canon. You have a written text, which is gospel. In Zen Buddhism, there's no particular written text, and the relationship is between the teacher and the student. But they have a very peculiar teaching method called the use of koans. And koans the word koan means a public case or a story, a public story, like a fairy tale. And these are strange stories about encounters between monks and masters, and sometimes they are commonly questions, like a very beginning koan is what was the shape of your face before your parents were born? And you must answer this question. You do meditation all day long and these intensive things for 10 to 12, 14 hours at a time, and you have to meet with a teacher 4 times a day, and he asks you this question, and you have to make a presentation one way or the other. It's a very embarrassing and peculiar situation because of the kind of intensity that builds up, and the fact that he's asking you this all the time, and you want to answer. You want to please him, and you want to. Most people that are drawn to it want to somehow. They're drawn to it for religious reasons. They want somehow, they're suffering in some kind of way, they want somehow to solve their life's problems or come to some kind of understanding. But many of the koans are folk tales or fairy tales. They have that aspect. And when I work on these stories, it's interesting, they're kind of like meditations. These stories are ways in which you can enrich yourself in many ways, because you, by figuring out who these are and delving into the story and become fascinated and fixated by the story itself is a way to enter into your psyche. I mean, in the Bible itself, of course, the parables are there. The parables are stories, in a way, like fairy tales. And by delving into these fairy tales or stories in the Bible, there are many different levels of understanding that you can gain from them. And the way, I'll guarantee you all are young now, and maybe you'll remember what I say, but 20 years from now, when you go look at the parables that you knew at this age, and you look back at them, if you continue your religious life, you will not believe that you could have been so naive about them. They will change when you change. You change and they will change. And they will have levels of meaning that are appropriate for you now, but the level of meaning that they will have 20 years hence will be completely different. after you have some experience and setbacks in your life. So these fairy tales are not children's things, really. I mean, when you think about it, where did the fairy tale come from? Do you think in the Middle Ages that people believed in rational thought or science or things like that? They had no idea about this. This is a very recent assumption that we're making in Western culture, that these things, these magical tales, are only fit for children. Everybody believed in stuff like this in the Middle Ages. Can you imagine in a peasant house in Ireland, sitting around a fire with you thought the world was flat and anything 20 miles away would have been chaos and hell? You wouldn't have believed that there could have been devils and strange happenings and birds that talked and horses that talked and things like that. It was very real to the adult audience. So in that cases, it was told probably to many people, adults and children alike. But as a matter of fact, things like Armageddon and all these things that you see in movies like that are nothing more. I mean, oh, well, I believe that. You know, that's true. A meteor might hit us, for sure. It's nothing more than a fairy tale. How about the year 2000? That's another one that I think, personally, I think it's like a modern folk tale. It has all these kind of paranoia. Everybody's Armageddon, the year 2000. It's sort of like our version of the world's going to be swallowed by a dragon. The computers won't work. I think they will. I'm pretty sure they will. But especially if you have a new one. But that's the kind of things that happen. These things, you know, it's hard to reflect on your own culture and all the strange things that you have. There's a book, incidentally, a very interesting book. Maybe your teacher will have it. I'm sure it's in the library, called The Choking Doberman. And it's a collection of urban folk tales that people will believe in. Hey, you remember that woman that stuck her cat in the microwave? Hey, you heard of that one, haven't you? It happened down there in Petersburg. I heard about it, read in the paper. Stuff like that. But those things get told over and over again. They're like fairy tales come to life again. And they are happening now in your lives. And there are many things that you believe that are like that. You want to believe them because you have an inclination. You were born to believe them as a human being. So anyway, that's my take on fairy tales. Anybody want to ask any questions now about the making of the film, about the actors, and how you do anything like this? Or, you know, I'd be glad to talk to you about this. Don't be embarrassed. Yes.
I was just curious, some of those scenes didn't seem too appropriate for a very young child. I know you said you didn't make it for children, but would you find it...
What do you mean, because of the cutting and violence and stuff like that? Yeah.
Stuff like that.
Well, because I think that actually those things are appropriate for children. I think violence, fairy tales are dark. Fairy tales are extremely bloody. And, you know, the Bible is full of stories like that. Now, you could say, hey, I remember one guy, he said to me, you know, I really love Christianity, he says, you know, but there's one thing I just can't abide about it, and that's the crucifixion. Just do away with that. Now, that, oddly enough, is, there is these fairy tales, historically, it's an interesting question, Yelly. We are entering in a time in America in which there's a certain amount of timidity and concern. We're becoming much more conservative now, and there's a great deal of concern about child raising and violence and so forth. When, in fact, statistics are that it's a much less violent culture than it was now. I mean, there's fewer things. But there's so much of it on the media that you think there's a lot of it. I mean, it sells, basically. There's a sort of a cynical thing like this. How about the thing about certain violence that sells, it has a pornographic thing? You know, like these police shows that they have? These fascinating police shows? They're very interesting shows. They're just wreck after wreck, or guys getting beat up and stuff like that, or videos, just little clips of videos. You don't know the character, you don't know whether there's any heroism involved, you know nothing. It's just like it's pornographic. It's like taking pictures of people making love without knowing any of the characters or entering into their psyches. So that is pornographic. But when violence is used, it seems to me, or let's say, let's not even use the word violence, it's conflict. You're dealing with conflicts in a film. In Romeo and Juliet, you all studied it in high school, right? Everybody probably had to read Romeo and Juliet. This, you know, Tybalt is terrible. He's a very violent character, and he is, you know, he's killed, and there's the poison in the thing, and there's suicide, and all that kind of stuff. All that stuff is a function of stories. I think what your question is that I feel that if the thing is purposeful, and the violence or darkness of conflict of the story is to test the heroine or hero and ennoble them. For example, one of the most violent movies around today is the Private Ryan. Everybody seen that movie? That film is terribly ennobling film. It's terribly violent and chaos, but I mean, the guy isn't going. What kind of ennobling was, it says, hey, we're going to make a movie about a guy who has to wait in line at the DMV. Oh, God, a whole half an hour I waited in line. He's noble. You know, it has to be a test. And therefore, all this stuff, I mean, people can look at incidents in violence in children's films and just label them like that. 1, 2, 3, have 5 incidents of violence. It's not a kid's film. It's ridiculous. You have to look at it from the point of view of your heart or your intent, something like that. I don't know if you wouldn't like. I don't think this kid. I think this film is a little too old for little kids. I mean, it's really like maybe 13, 12, 13, 10. You know, like tweens they call them. I think the best audience is a young girl's audience. It's a slow-moving movie. It's a little bit old-fashioned, so it's not very quick. The latest. Did you see the latest version of that the Los Angeles version of Romeo and Juliet, with a real violent kind of quality? That was really. I mean, that was. But it was very engaging. I liked the movie. I thought it was silly the way they talked. I mean, the way they were dressed and then they talked like that. It really jarred me for a while. But I got kind of used to it after a while. But I do think that question, that really bugs me a lot, because there are certain very, very, especially timid parents who basically go on this level. Parenting is an extremely difficult thing to do in any way. You girls, many girls and boys too, don't know what you're getting into. But it is a very, very hard business. And it is doubly hard in the modern world, where so much pressure is on the commercial side of life, and there is so little time for elements and there's no, usually you're not living next to grandparents, depending on where you're living. I mean, it's a very mobile society, so all those little things that help sustain people in village economies or agricultural societies aren't there any longer, so you're kind of on your own. And so it's very hard. I mean, there's all kinds of institutions that are developing probably to help out in this area, but it's extremely hard. And one of the things it does, it makes people very timid, and also it makes families extremely paranoid. Paranoia is one of the biggest mythologies now. Is the daycare center? That's one of the biggest urban. And people are arrested. This is the biggest urban thing. That made me so mad when those people in North Carolina. I said, this is purely folklore of the evil people. Oh, let's see. We're going to get together with the cook, the assistant, and everything, and we're all going to get together and agree to sodomize children. Hey, would you like to do something fun? We'll all sodomize these kids, and we'll all agree to combine forces. And hey, I mean, you couldn't even ask your best friend that question, let alone that it's because everybody works now. Everybody's away. That guy who wrote Iron John, the poet, Robert Bly, said, when your father is away, you think he's up to no good. the archetypical play is Death of a Salesman. That is a perfect example of the father who is up to no good. Biff thinks he's up to no good because he's away. My father was a very loving man, but he was away. I used to think, God, I wonder if he's having an affair. In the old days, fathers weren't away. The guy was there every day. You know, he's a farmer. He comes in for lunch even. So, I mean, that kind of thing has changed. All women are working. They have daycare. They think, what are they doing with Joey? Christ, they're sodomizing him. It's because of your own guilt that you feel these things. It's transferred in the society, and those people were convicted and put through hell. It was exactly the story of the Salem witch trials. Anybody in Salem that had any imagination, well, witch. These things that come out pathologically in society.
Is that your idea with the witch burning at the end?
Well, you know, that's an interesting question. If you look at the Grimm's version of Snow White, the final paragraph in that story is that she was so consumed with jealousy that she couldn't stay away from the wedding. And when she arrived, they took iron slippers and heated them in a stove until they were red hot, forced her to wear them and dance until she died. And that's the last line of the tale. Nice, friendly story. We didn't think we could do that.
Did you come up with the parallel yourself? You must have, because all the motifs are there. The blood on the handkerchief.
Oh, yeah.
The organ of the, you know, and the
Yeah.
brother kindly hunter and so forth.
Yeah, all that was derivative.
And the apples, when she spits the apple out.
Yeah, I mean, we did that scene. That's interesting because we had to do that scene twice. We shot that scene, and we had her made up. The makeup artist didn't quite. She was a glamour makeup artist, and she wanted everybody to look like glamour shots. And so when she was dead, she was very glamorous. And when we played it there, it's like, and she got well, you know. And it was like, look, this is so sappy. So we went back and we stuffed an apple and said, look, vomit it up. It'll be much funnier and it'll be gutsier, because the story is, remember in the story, Snow White is, first of all, it's a difficult plot. You should go read that story. You say, okay, how does the prince fall in love with this girl? She gets zapped by the apple. You know, it comes back. She's kind of a stupid girl. And she comes back 3 times, and she zaps her and finally gives her the apple. It's a garter, a belt, a comb, and then an apple. I mean, the dwarves can see the belt and they can see the comb, but the apple's taken internally, so they don't know what it is. So they put her in a glass coffin, and then they go out and they sit around and they wait up there with the animals and things and guard her coffin, and she's like in a kind of hibernation stage. And along comes the prince, and he sees a dead girl in the coffin, and he falls in love with her. I mean, really, that's hard to figure out how you're going to handle that one. So a necrophiliac prince. So we had to figure out how. I mean, we had to introduce them earlier. And then we came up with the idea of the rivalry between the two technologies. Just like now, if you're a person of my age and you don't know how to use a computer and you lose your job in a corporation, you've got parents, girls, I'm sure, fathers who don't know that much about computers, and mothers too. And they get fired, forget it. They're not going to get a job. It's not easy. They'll hire some kid who knows how to run a computer at $8 an hour. And the fact is that this is a huge shift. And it makes men jealous of other men, too. Men are jealous. You can see, jealousy is not, obviously, it's not a female. You don't have a monopoly on it. You have men are jealous, but they're not jealous over looks. They're jealous over roles and power and jobs. Jobs. Men see themselves in terms of their jobs. That's why so many men, when they retire, they're dead in about 5 years. And it's a very difficult thing for men. You know, there's lots I can say. Shall we talk about the president? Could he resist? Very difficult for him to. Men are programmed in certain kind of ways, like chickens. And roosters, if you ever watched that. Especially when you're young. He was a little old. But anyway, yes.
This is going to kill me. I'm sorry. Why didn't you make him slit his stomach?
Yeah, I
That was
curious
so
about
painful to me. I don't know about anybody else.
Well, you know what I thought of?
What about a deer or chicken or
Yeah, we
steak?
thought of that. We thought of that. Hey, you could drive back, run into a deer, and do this.
Maybe that's
Yeah,
typical,
we
yeah.
thought of that. We
Well,
didn't think
that's
of.
in the story.
No, yeah, he takes an organ out of an animal. And we thought of that. We just couldn't figure out how could he do. He's driving back. Oh, roadkill. You know, I mean, it was just like. I mean, no. You're right. We thought of that the whole time. And this idea, oddly enough, I said beg, borrow, and steal, came from the story of Parzival, which is an interesting story. In Parzival, the knight is castrated by a Moorish knight, and in the story, I don't know all the story that well. Maybe you do, Elizabeth. But it's a medieval story, and this knight, it's a Wagnerian opera too, and he is castrated or wounded in the groin, and he is sick, and the whole kingdom is become sick. He goes out to find the Grail, and the Holy Grail is somehow related to the fact he won't tell anybody about this wound, the secret wound that he has. It's like a secret, and as soon as he reveals it, he tells somebody about it, the thing gets all right. I think it's, I'm not sure, absolutely sure, but I knew the story better at the time, but anyway, it was somehow about the secret wound that he would have. So he would be dying. You see, he's dying and losing energy. Otto, who was this person, secretly, like he was almost as if he was, he's sort of ashamed of himself, or trying to inflict this wound on himself, because he was so conflicted about this thing. I mean, he was ready to elope with this young girl, essentially. I mean, he was like, in a way, like a father. I did a film called Hansel and Gretel, the first film we did. And in that story, everybody said to me, adults already said, well, how come the father's so willing to take the girl out, to take the family out, and doesn't do anything? Well, from the point of view of a little child, again, I'm jumping back and forth between children and adults, and it's probably not, my reasoning isn't completely without flaw. But from the point of view of a little child, your parents don't say, your mother says, Daddy, what are you around here? Daddy, Mom says I have to go to bed early today and without my supper because I killed a cat. You don't believe I should go to bed. And what if your father says, oh, your mother's just full of crap. You can stay up and watch television tonight. I'll just go and tell her. Of course he's going to say, yes, you go to bed, even though he doesn't think you should. He's going to agree with you. The parents form a united front in this case, and so that the father kind of goes along with them. I used to think about your question about violence and say, hey, I got a great idea for a children's movie. How about we do this film where there's this couple, and there's this man, and he has a couple of kids. His wife's died, and he's got a job out in the aerospace industry out in Seattle or someplace like that. And he's making pretty good money, but he's lonely. He goes to a bar, and he meets some girl there at this bar, and he doesn't know much about her, but they get married, and she can't stand his kids. I mean, his stepchildren. She thinks they're the worst things like this. So she connives and figures out and gets a big insurance policy on them and convinces her husband, because she's really a dynamite, sexy girl, and she's got him bamboozled that way. And she convinces him to go out. They're going to go out in a national park somewhere and just lose him. Hey, and we'll collect on the insurance, because also he's had a setback. They fired everybody. The corporation closed down, and he's really desperate. He bought a Winnebago and a house, and the creditors are after him. So he goes along with it. Well, the two children go out there, and they abandon them in the forest, and the two children end up with a queer imprisoned by a queer cannibal who lives out, some sort of weird guy that's out there in the that guy that the Unabomber. He's out there and the queer cannibal is going to eat one of the kids. That's the story of Hansel. I could go to any ABC, NBC to think they say, hey, a lovely children's program. We'll do it. In a million years, you couldn't get funded for that. And that's the classic story of Hansel and Gretel. The greatest children's story that ever was.
Maybe that's why Disney hasn't done it yet.
Oh, in Disney's version, the witch is killed. You know how Disney's kills the witch? And do you remember that in Snow White?
Fire.
What? No, not Hansel and Gretel. Snow White. Remember, she runs up from the dwarves up on the hill, and she's trying to lever this big rock down on them, and she slips. Yeah, they couldn't do it. In the 1950s, they couldn't have her in the slippers, or couldn't have, they had to make her die because of her own doing.
Well, you couldn't do it.
No, I couldn't. I had to. I mean, that was a hard thing. There's a very interesting things when you're dealing with modern sensibilities, you have to change things. One of the hardest things, I sent Elisabeth a film called Mutzmeg. Have you seen that one?
I haven't seen it yet.
Well, in that one, we had to kill a dog. We had to kill a dog. It was an Appalachian story in which we had to beat a dog to death in a sack. We also had to kill the witch's daughters. Which was easier? It's easier to kill a person in a modern 1980s movie than it is a dog.
Did
That
you really kill the dog?
no. We put a little boy in the sack. That was easy. As a matter of fact, we had a terrible accident on that set, and what happened was that we had an actor. You see the movie, and this guy named Bart Whiteman is a very violent actor, and he came in there, and I said, okay, we got a little boy to go in the sack and poke around like this, and he says, okay, Bart, go in there and make out like you're gonna hit, and we're gonna cut the shot, just back like this, and we'll cut it in a close-up. So he goes like this, and damn if he doesn't hit the boy.
Oh my goodness.
On the back. Wow, man, he screamed. I thought he had really broken his back. With a big club, like a ball bat. And fortunately, it was okay. But he did break the collarbone of the little girl who played in the story. And it was just a very difficult, you'll see if you see that movie, that's got it is a gripping story of a very resourceful, it's kind of like a male story, like a jack tale that's put into with a female, and it's a very American story. So we set it really down in very primitive Appalachian kind of milieu, and it's pretty nice movie actually. I think it's got more punch than this one. It's certainly faster movie, and it's frightening. Because it's got some really creepy things. It's like a Cinderella story.
Where do you play them? Where do they play?
Well, mostly libraries, public libraries. We have. Has anybody seen any of my films when you were growing up in public school? Like From the Brothers Grimm has been on the air forever, and as a school series with study guides for language arts, and they tape them off for language arts, and we've been since the 1980s, since you guys were little kids. They have been in the movies, but I have not been able to get them, except on PBS. We've not been able to get them on television very much. They've been sold to, this film has been sold to England and Russia and South Africa and Australia, Brazil, Mexico, but it's never been picked up by anybody in the United States. Just period.
For broadcast?
For broadcast and cable.
Television.
Yeah, and neither cable or anybody is interested in it. I don't know whether they think it's too violent or it's too slow or what, but we got the Carnegie Award for the film, which is the American Library Association. It's kind of a little stuffy, but it is the major award for children's movies in the United States. And they told me that, there's just not that many good submissions anymore. So I said, oh God, we got it by default. But all the films have received that kind of award, not that specific one, but these American Library Association. So if you go down any public library, you can pick these things out. You'll find them in any public.
What was the Indian guy's name, the actor?
Floyd King. Floyd King. All the actors that you see were associated with the Washington, D.C. Shakespeare Company. They do the thing in the Carter Barron Amphitheater. If you've been up to Washington, D.C., they're all very, very good Shakespearean actors, except for Otto. Otto's a mime in Washington, D.C., named Mark Jester, wonderful mime. And then Willa, of course, is a young person. And Sammy Ross was a friend of Mark Jester, who played Otto, and he was an old vaudevillian, and he does little leprechaun acts in bars in Maryland. Yeah.
I think we have one more question.
Yeah.
What are you working on right now?
Well, not really much. I'm pretty much a farmer now. So I have my father, who supported the farm for many, many years, is in his 90s now, and I've had to take over the operation. It's a big 1,600-acre cattle farm. So I work a lot on that now, and then I'm making documentaries mostly about local things that interest me in the community, like like the history of a little small town, or like our church, what's the history of the graves and of all the people in our graves, the graveyards. Or I'm kind of interested in maybe doing a film on the history of Zen practice in the United States and the development of Buddhism. That would be a more major thing. But there's no more fairy tales. I have no more fairy tales in the wind. You remember, did you all see Ash Pet? Remember the black woman, Dark Sally? Well, I just finished a documentary on her. She's dead now. And the movie is called When My Work Is Over. And it's a story about her and her sisters. It's a very simple documentary. I'm going down now to do some finishing touches on it, about her and her sisters reminiscing about growing up as black women in the South in the 1940s and 50s. And she was a wonderful, wonderful actress and person, but she was unknown. All these people were unknown. I mean, she was truly a star. And she grew up as a domestic worker, and she worked in a restaurant as a waitress. And she was a gifted storyteller. And we found her through these folklore circles. But that, working with these amateur folklore people is just wonderful experience. You can find, for example, if you want to make movies, you can find in your local community very interesting people to work with. The problem is an economic one, is that in an age of standardization, you cannot sell things unless they're immediately recognizable. If you have a star in your film, they say, the last film this person did is, they don't even look at your movie or anything. They look at the star who's in the movie and so forth. And interestingly enough, I mean, dealing with cattle is a very interesting thing. I deal with cattle, and you deal with a lot of genetic and marketplace forces that are in things. And I'm going to talk about cattle, but then I want you to interpolate in terms of your own life, reproductive life. Cattle are, especially purebred cattle, there are many breeds of purebred cattle in the United States, but for some reason, Angus cattle, because they have a lot of computer records that they have developed a larger computer-based data on Angus cattle. And you ever seen that certified Angus beef in supermarkets that sells a lot higher? There's a special thing like this. Well, they promoted this because of the computer base and the promotions that go. And Angus cattle now dominate the cattle market. And everybody wants to breed to a black bull. If you've got any kind of Herefords or other color cattle, most of the time, unless you're kind of real renegade, unless you're going to take a hit in the marketplace, you've got to have black cattle, and you've got to have crosses with Angus. You've got to breed them. Now, there's semen catalogs that sell semen. A lot of these things are catalogs of bulls for artificial insemination. Well, these bulls that are popular are promoted tremendously by these semen sales companies. There's one bull, for example, EXT. He must have, 35, 50,000, progeny out there. Well, the problem is, he's got breeding sisters to sisters and half-sisters and everything like this. But he's done that way because these companies now, through marketing and promotion, it would never occur 20, 30 years ago. They didn't have the marketing, they didn't have the computer data, and they didn't have the ability to say, if you have a bull cow by EXT, you're going to sell that cow for 10 cents more a pound than you are another cow. So everybody, it's like there's a little gene pool. It's really narrowing. Well, I went to a cattle sale the other day, and I talked to this guy, and he was from Missouri, and he's working in Alexandria, and I said, what are you doing? He's a young guy, and he said, well, I studied animal reproduction at University of Missouri and ag courses like that. And he says, so what are you doing? He said, I work at he said, he can't believe it. He said, I work in this tremendously burgeoning business on human reproduction. I said, what do you mean? I said, well, it's exactly the same as cows. He says, we have catalogs of guys. And we don't have pictures of these guys, but I said, what do you mean? I said, what's the most kids you've had? And one guy said, he said about 200 or 300 kids. And say you want to get some semen, they have these catalogs, and they say, PhD, lawyer, doctor, in Fairfax. They're all going to be all over the place. They're going to open one in Shanghai, they're doing one in Brazil. Not only, but they can guarantee you either sex of the child, and they can guarantee you defect-free children. Wouldn't that be nice? No cystic fibrosis. No Down syndrome. You are going to have the perfect child. Just come here, and they got a nice husband, but you might be taking a chance, you know. I can see the science fiction like that. Why would, if you knew, he told me, he said, in this group of people, 5% of you carry the gene of cystic fibrosis. If you meet another person with that gene, you'll have a cystic fibrosis child. When you see Mutsmeg, I'll tell you, that little girl, she's dead now, that played Mutsmeg, had cystic fibrosis. She died last year. But that family never had another child after that. That there is a problem here. No, you haven't seen that movie. So, I'm thinking, there is a sort of weird extension from this. I said, do you let the women look at pictures? They said, no, we don't let them look at the pictures. We figure out who they should be mated with, as far as looks are concerned. You know, their husband's got dark hair. If he's got a fertility problem, then they look for, in the catalog, for a guy that's got dark hair. The average, I said, well, what do you say? We noticed that they have popular guys in these catalogs, just like the bulls. Everybody goes for this certain type. So you go for an undergraduate, not in a million years will they pick an undergraduate. They want a graduate student. Or a professional. I mean, look, right? You know these undergraduates, you wouldn't marry one. It's very, very interesting. But in the future, with all, I mean, the cattle business is, ideally in the cattle business, I mean, for the industrial use of cattle and stuff like that, the clone is the ideal situation. Have everything exactly the same, like the schmooze in the little Abner cartoons when I was a kid. Exactly the same kind of animal that would go through and be totally the same weight at a certain size, and you could feed them in the same place, and everybody could go to the supermarket and get a nice cut meat all packaged in a certain kind of way. That's almost what's happening with chickens now. Cattle are much more free and completely chaotic relationship because most cattle are raised by small farmers or large farmers on grass until they're 800 or 900 pounds, and then they're sent to feed lots. But again, speaking of paranoia, people, a lot of you are vegetarians. How many of you are vegetarians in this group? Or don't eat that much meat? Don't eat red meat very much. Okay? That would never happen in my generation. How many of you have ever killed a chicken? Not? Well, yeah, his age. Yeah,
I love it.
yeah. You cannot. No, you all are totally, for the first time in the history of mankind, totally cut off from your food supply. You don't know where you get it from. You don't take any responsibility for killing things. Maybe you raise vegetables, and then you'll eat vegetables. But basically, you don't kill the animals that you eat. So consequently, you think somebody's fooling around with them. You know, they're either bad for your health, or they're got E. coli, or whatever, you know. And there's also a sense of national guilt about these things. If you have a slaughterhouse that all these poor guys that are having to kill these animals, like, oh, how many animals did they kill today? Oh, I killed 1,000 cows. Well, I mean, that's hard on a person to do that, to ask a person to do that for you. You know, because you don't kill them, somebody's going to kill them. Mexican guy, you know, somebody with not a good education. So consequently, this creates a sense of national guilt, and it comes out in strange ways, how these things pay themselves out. There are psychic forces, let me tell you, around that are cause all kinds of national feelings and hysteria. Eventually affects the stock market.
Let's start with the stock market. If people have more questions that they want to ask Mr. Davenport up here, that's fine. Otherwise, thank you very much for coming.
I hope you don't use those catalogs later, unless you have to.